Hey everyone, I just want to welcome you to our session with Greg Atkinson. He is the founder of the Worship Impressions as well as the First Impressions Conference, author and consultant. Greg, I am so excited to connect with you. You offer such a unique and valuable perspective into mental health and faith, and I just thank you for joining us.
Yes, I am truly honored to be here and love what you're doing, love what this conference is about. And I wanted to be a part of it. This is something that's long overdue for the Big C Church and for the world as a whole. And so I'm just humbled and honored to be a part of this effort to educate, inspire, and encourage people.
Thank you. Yes, thank you so much to come on. But I think you are a advocate of mental health, and you have a unique perspective in that you are both a someone with lived experience of mental health, as well as pastor and a consultant and author. So you have an approach or a perspective that many people may not be able to speak to. So can you share with us just at the beginning stages, some of those early thoughts that you had as a pastor, maybe kind of give some of that backstory?
Sure. Well, I've been a pastor for 26 years. So since 1994, went on staff at my first church. And, they say 1 out of 4, 1 out of 5 people has mental illness. And so that includes family and friends. And so I had several family members with mental illness, including myself, but I have brothers, sister, aunt, cousins. And so there were people in my family, and I had a cousin that was my age that was like a peer. We would get together as family and play at holidays and Thanksgiving and Christmas. And so it was a cousin I always saw who, when we got older as young adults, she was struggling with depression.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember telling my wife, if she just prayed more, if she just had a quiet time, it would go away. And I thought everything was spiritual. And I didn't understand that there's chemical components and chemistry of the brain, and that sometimes you need to take medicine. And so I just remember being so ignorant and arrogant and saying, if she would just pray more, if she would just have a quiet time, she would be fine. And then at the age of 24 in 1999, I had major back surgery, 3 ruptured discs. And I spent 2 months in a hospital bed, flat on my back. And for the first time in my life, I experienced true, deep, dark depression where I wanted to die. And God opened my eyes and I said, oh my gosh, this is real. This is real. Depression is a real thing. And so that was 1999. My eyes were open. And then in 2006 is when I got diagnosed. I was in between churches. I was attending Fellowship Dallas in Dallas, Texas, which used to be Fellowship Bible Church. And Gary Brandenburg was my pastor and was instrumental in my life and my family, and was just a great pastor and mentor. And we would get together and meet, and I did some consulting with them and Josh McDowell and other ministries, and was doing a lot of consulting in Dallas. But I remember when I got diagnosed with anxiety and bipolar in 2006, everything was brand new to me. And I met with Gary in his office, and I said, they're telling me to take medicine. What do you think? And he said, Greg, if you had diabetes, would you take insulin? And I said, sure. And he said, take your medicine. And it just, somehow it got through to me. God opened my eyes. And since that day in 2006, so 14 years ago, we're in 2020, I have never once missed a dose of medicine.
Wow.
Never once. A lot of people with mental illness or bipolar are known for, I feel better, I don't need to take my medicine anymore. And you're kind of up and down and up and down. I am steady and consistent. I have never missed a dose. I just locked it in my head. You need medicine. If you had diabetes, you would take insulin. If you have anxiety, you have depression, you have a mood disorder, take your mood stabilizer, take your medicine. And so I take, Xanax for anxiety, and it just keeps me calm and chill and even. And I've just always taken it. And so I believe in God using medicine and science, and I believe in counseling and therapy. A lot of things that used to have a stigma for me, I remember thinking negative thoughts about people that go to counseling. And so God has just opened my eyes through my own personal experience. And then that has allowed me over the last 14 years as a pastor to really have a big heart for people as they come in my office and they're struggling with anxiety and depression and suicidal thoughts and taking medicine and sitting with couples. I remember talking with people, 3 different people at my last church that came to me as a pastor and were in need of counseling, that were taking the same medicine, the same drugs I was taking, and they didn't know it. It was in my pocket. I never said a word. It was in my pocket and I didn't say anything. And so for so long, I was quiet because of the stigma,
Hmm.
and never spoke about it. But God has a way of getting us to open up and to share. And so that's why I'm glad to be a part of this conference.
Yeah. I'm curious. I'm curious because, you have worship impressions and first impressions, and that's all about connection with people. But when you say you spent years and years and years not telling anyone, what did that feel like? What was it like to hide or have this secret part of you that you weren't able to share? Like, why was that? And can you tell me more?
Yeah, it just felt necessary. There's a social acceptance when you say I struggle with anxiety. People are like, oh yeah, that's tough. My sister struggles with anxiety. But when you say the B word, when you
Mhm.
say, hey, I have bipolar, that's a negative first impression. And
Mhm.
for so long, and anybody with mental illness has this hate for the word crazy. We can't stand the word crazy. And it's like um, uh, it's highly offensive. And so um, for so long, people just kind of thought they were synonymous, bipolar and crazy.
Mm.
Where actually with bipolar, you can be a creative genius, and there's a lot of
Absolutely.
very successful celebrities, scientists,
Mhm.
musicians, artists, and movie stars, and just people that are just operating off the charts with creative genius that have bipolar and have mental illness. But there's a stigma with the B word. And so in my own story, I went on staff at a church years ago, and I said, I've been diagnosed with anxiety and a mood disorder. And they were like, okay, no problem. And I got the job. Church grew, tripled in size. My campus, I was a multi-site pastor, campus pastor. We tripled in size, and we're leading all campuses in baptisms and growth. And I was getting asked to speak at conferences at Lifeway about turning around a campus, and we were just blowing and going. And I remember telling my senior pastor, one day I'm going to tell you something about me. He was, oh man, you could tell me anything. You could
Mhm.
tell me anything. There's no problem. My man, I love you. You're my man. You're my man.
Yeah.
I could do no wrong in his eyes because we were just blowing and going, and we had the fastest growing campus. And then one day I said the B word. I said, remember I told you when I was hired, I have a mood disorder. It's actually bipolar, and his whole facial expression changed. And the next thing I know, I was fired. And so that you can read, there's a whole Wall Street Journal story about that. I don't need to go into it, but the Wall Street Journal did a lot of investigative journalism over a period of months and interviewed me and the insurance company and the pastor and wrote a whole story along with other pastors. They were doing a story on pastors that have been fired due to mental illness. And
Mhm.
where this touches on me, when I talk about leading the First Impressions Conference and writing books, here's my latest book, and this isn't a promo, but it's called Hospitality Ministry. When I write books about hospitality, it's about being welcoming
Yeah.
to all people, regardless of their background and what they struggle with. It's about loving our neighbor
Mm.
as ourselves. And so when I have a passion for hospitality and for making sure that everybody feels welcome at church, it's due out of this blood, sweat, and tears and this pain that I have experienced in my own life of not being welcome and losing my job and being fired. I remember the last Sunday at my church, um, I was forced to resign. And I kind of took the high road and resigned and wrote a letter, which is on my blog. You can read a blog post called Why I Resigned yesterday at gregatkinson.com. It's been there for years. But
Mhm.
um, when I resigned and I stood down front at the end of the service, uh, every service, there was 2 morning services, every services, people would come by through the line and they would hug me and they would say, thank you, Pastor Greg. I struggle with anxiety. Thank you. I struggle with depression. Thank you. I have bipolar. Thank you. I have anxiety. Thank you. I have
Yeah.
depression. Just person after person after person after person. hugging me, telling me, thank you for opening up. And so my resignation and every word I said is on my website. Um, but even then in the resignation, I said mood disorder. I didn't use the B word because I had such a stigma. And I told my agent, that's one of the future books I want to write. It's called The B Word, um, because it just has such a stigma.
Yes.
You know, you can say, hey, I struggle with depression, or I struggle with anxiety, and people are like, oh man, that's tough. I'm praying for you. But you say bipolar, and they think it's synonymous with crazy, which is unfair because you can be brilliant and
Yes.
intelligent and competent
Yes.
and still have to take medicine. And so for me, it means you have a chemical imbalance. You need to take a mood stabilizer to stabilize your mood, and then you're fine and solid and everything's normal. It also affects a lot of things. There's things that I can relate to people about, you know, people that travel with me when I've been on trips in ministry. They see me carrying around pill bottles, and they see me at certain times of night having to take my night medicine. And so for years, people said, hey, what's that about? And said, well, I have a anxiety and mood disorder, and I have to take medicine to help me sleep. But this has affected a lot of things that I can relate to people about, including my own daughter. I have 3 kids, but one of my daughters struggles with mental illness and anxiety and disorder. Severe anxiety so bad that she can't even go to school. She's been online school for the last 4 years because she's too anxious to go in person. And so she was online before it was cool with COVID. She's online. She doesn't go out in public. She always stays home in her room, and it just breaks my heart. But I see her struggling with taking medicine and all that it has to do for a young teenager to have to take medicine, take something in the morning and something at night. And I take something in the morning and something at night. And so when you look at my calendar, I have a public calendar. I do a lot of meetings. I stay very busy and lead a lot of things and have my hands on a lot of things. But when you look at my public calendar, all of my meetings start at 11 a.m. and later because of my sleep and because of not knowing how long I'm going to sleep, how deep I'm going to sleep. My drugs sedate me and put me and knock me out, put me into a deep sleep. And so that affects a lot of things. So a lot of times when people will say, can I interview you, or can we meet, or can we talk at on Tuesday, I'll say, yeah, as long as it's not the morning. Always, that's my answer. As long as it's not the morning, I can meet with you at 8 p.m. Just don't let it be the morning. And so there's different things that I've had to adjust and modify and adapt. And I talk about that in my book, Strange Leadership, Adaptation. But we're overcomers, and we can get through this. And so when I lost my job at my last church, I went through a deep, dark night of the soul, through really deep depression and a really big low. And God just told me to start journaling and to keep seeking Him and to worship. And so I was watching YouTube videos every day of worship, and I was reading my Bible, and I was just seeking God and crying out to God because I was so sad that I had lost my job as a husband and father. And I was in this deep, deep, dark low. And I went back and I looked through my journal and all the notes I had written down. And that's where my devotional, Take Courage, Winning the War on Fear, came out of. That is published by YouVersion, the Bible app. It's been downloaded over 100,000 times. It's been translated into Spanish and Portuguese. And it's something that I'm very proud of because when you read it, it's very raw, and you see my heart, and you see my struggle, and you see how I take my anxiety to God. That devotional, Take Courage, Winning the War on Fear, specifically targeted anxiety because, again, that was a more acceptable mental illness to talk about. When you look at YouVersion, the Bible app, they have a lot of subjects, a lot of categories that devotionals fall under, and they list them in order of popularity. Number 1 is love. Number 2 is anxiety.
Yeah.
That's how serious it is. And so the second largest category for devotionals on all of YouVersion is anxiety. And so you're not alone. I'm not alone. We're not alone. We're in this together. And that's what my devotional talks about, to take courage and to bring it to God.
Awesome. Oh, there's so many things that I wanted to ask. You touched on a couple of them. So you mentioned that when you came out from that last pastoral placement, that last church, and you you went through a journey or a process. You said that you developed a sleep routine, you journaled, you listened to a lot of worship and YouTube's um, and think sermons and messages. And how long of that process? I'm thinking of the person who's watching this feeling hopeless, like they are a pastor, they're struggling right now. Will they ever overcome this? Will they ever see victory? Will they ever be able to be restored? Or they feel disqualified, they feel knocked out of the game. So can you speak to that? Like, what did it take for you to go from the bottom to where you feel where you are today? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I want to first say that you're going to make it, and you're not alone. As Laura said, there's so many times where you feel isolated and alone, and I tell so many people, isolation is a tool of the enemy.
Mm.
It's what he uses to keep you down. It's what he uses to take your life. The enemy plays for keeps, and he gives you deep, dark thoughts to try to take your life. And so many pastors over the last several years have committed suicide and have taken their lives. Young pastors, good-looking pastors, sharp guys, friends of mine. I was friends with Jared Wilson and other pastors in their 20s and 30s that have taken their life. And it's what happens, Pastor, is you feel alone, you feel isolated. You think, I can't tell my board, I can't tell my elders, I can't tell my deacons that I struggle with mental illness. I can't tell them I'm feeling depressed. They could never know because I'm at the top. I'm the pastor. I'm the head chief. I'm the boss. They can't know that I'm struggling with depression. And so I ran a nonprofit called xpastors.com, expastors.com, for former, current, and future pastors, people that were struggling with depression and suicidal thoughts. And we got emails every day from pastors around the world, and we would connect them to counselors. The thing I would tell you now is to, one, get into counseling, and you can do it just like this via Zoom. You can do it digitally in this COVID era, or if you're not comfortable going to somebody in person in your city because you think there's a stigma and somebody's going to see you going into Dr. So-and-so's office, that's okay. You can do it via Zoom in your own office or in your own home, but see somebody because they're bound to confidentiality. It's a safe place that you can vent and talk. I cannot tell you how many times, because in my last ministry position, I really had a lot of struggles with a mean boss, somebody who was very cruel to me. And so I would go to my counselor and just vent and talk about how tough it was. And I just had a safe place to just get it all out. And it has taken a toll. We've had so many struggles in our own family with family members that attempted suicide and had to be admitted into the hospital, and different stuff that has just worn on me and broken my heart and has made me heavier than normal. There's a lot of stuff that we've had to go through and endure with a family that has mental illness in the line of people. But I will say this, you will get through it and you can be victorious and you can be an overcomer, but it's not easy. And this is not just talk, I've lived it. This is through the power of God and the presence of the Holy Spirit being our right guard and being before us and behind us and beside us and inside us. The Spirit of God lives inside you. And so what I write about in my devotional, and this is so important, Pastor, is to listen to the voice of truth.
Mm-hmm.
There's an old Casting Crowns song that I used to love, and I wasn't really big into CCM or Casting Crowns, but I love their song, The Voice of Truth. Listen to the voice of truth. If there's a voice that is discouraging you and beating you up and tearing you down, it is not the voice of God. It is not the voice of God. And so fight to hear the voice of truth, that you are a child of God, that you are loved, you are adopted, you are beloved, you are adopted, you are chosen, that God has saved you and redeemed you and is restoring you and making you come to life. And so, and I speak this over my own family and my own daughter who struggles with depression, and we battle this daily. There is hope, and that hope is in Jesus.
Greg, you could preach. I love it. Yes. Okay. And then one other question I do want to ask is picture the pastor who is leading, feels out of touch. This is overwhelming. This is scary. They don't feel equipped to support this, but they are a leader and they want to create an environment in their church that people feel comfortable talking about this, that people can be open about it. Their staff members, their volunteers, their teams, they want to create an environment that is welcoming and healthy and safe. What can you encourage those pastors, those first steps of the things that they can do to help implement a safe environment that is open?
Yeah, that's a good question. One, I would say really get to know those in your life, because it's 1 out of 4. Get to know those in your life that struggle with mental illness and pick their brain and talk to them and be a listening ear to them. Practice active listening and be a friend to them. Rick Warren and Kay Warren went through the loss of a son. Their son committed suicide, and then they started a mental health summit, and they have reached and touched so many people. A friend of mine here in the Charlotte area, Derwin Gray at Transformation Church in Charlotte, had a family member that got diagnosed with bipolar and became suicidal. And so that woke him up and he got passionate about it. And they started a mental health awareness weekend here in Charlotte that happens once a year. They brought in Kay Warren to speak. They've had psychologists, counselors, psychiatrists, all kinds of therapists and doctors speak at it, and they dedicate an entire weekend every year to it. But it's because it impacted somebody personal to them. For Rick Warren, it was his son. For Doran, it was a family member. It was somebody close to them that struggled with mental illness. And so they decided to open this up to their congregation. Pastor, you are charged with shepherding the entire flock, not just 75%. You have to include the other 25%, all of your congregation, and that includes the 1 out of 4 that struggle with mental illness, and it could even be a family member. So we have to be sensitive to that. We have to realize that it's not just a spiritual thing. It doesn't matter how many times you pray it away. Sometimes you have this spirit of heaviness. They call him the prince of preachers. Charles Spurgeon was deeply depressed. I cannot tell you how many Spurgeon quotes I see online and how many times pastors quote Charles Spurgeon. Charles Spurgeon was deeply, darkly discouraged and depressed and has a lot of writings about depression and mental illness, but yet we quote him all the time as the prince of preachers. We love Charles Spurgeon. God can use a man like that. Rick Warren said he would never hire anybody if they had never been broken. There's something about the broken and contrite heart when we have been crushed before Almighty God that He can use us in a beautiful way. It's like it was meant to be, that we would be crushed and used by God. It's part of that refining fire and pruning process to make us who we were designed to be. But Pastor, you can do it, and you've got to lead out. And so find those in your community. Find people that are authority figures. Talk to counselors. Have a card. I used to, as a pastor, I had a card on my desk of a local counselor that I could refer people out to if it was over my head. When people start talking about addiction and drug addiction and alcoholism and things that I'm not trained for as a pastor, I'm not a licensed counselor. It's a whole different thing when you study counseling, the science of counseling, and you get a licensed degree in counseling. That's a different thing. So when it came over my head and it was dealing with domestic abuse and addiction, then I would say, here's my counselor's card. Please go see them. But have resources ready. And there are so many resources online. Look at this conference and all the resources and links and Facebook group and things that you can do to educate yourself. But you have that responsibility, Pastor. You have the responsibility to educate yourself, to take the initiative, to be intentional about your awareness and education. And I will tell you this, just for anybody that is struggling or that is on the fence or just coming to light, so many people misinterpret and think negative thoughts about people that struggle with mental illness. I remember years ago, I read a book called Grace for the Afflicted. It's one that a mentor recommended to me, and I recommend others read it. But they're not uneducated. They're not unintelligent. They're not anything negative about them. They are just afflicted, and they have to overcome some battles that others don't have to overcome. But like right now, I'm still writing, I'm still speaking, I'm still consulting. I still work with the largest, fastest growing churches in the country, and travel twice a month all over the nation, working with churches to help them think through their organizational structure, to think through their guest services and guest experience and first impressions. I work with a lot of organizations and keep doing my thing. I just happen to have this other affliction, this other struggle, and have to take medicine and see a counselor and see a doctor and overcome some stuff that maybe 3/4 of the people don't have to think about. But you as a pastor have to educate yourself and make you aware of what 1/4 of your congregation is going through, so that you can be that shepherd to them. You may get that phone call and you may be the voice that they reach out to, and you need to be ready and be sensitive and welcoming, because it could be my daughter calling you. It could be somebody that reaches out and says, that last lifeline of hope, I need somebody to talk to, and I pray that you'll be that person.
It's good. It's good. Thanks, Greg. Can we just give people next steps? So you mentioned the devotional in YouVersion. What is it called again?
Take courage.
Take courage. So you can find that on YouVersion. And then if people want to hear more from you and about you, where could they find that?
My blog, gregatkinson.com, and I write about stuff like this.
Fantastic. Okay. All right. Well, thank you, Greg, so much for joining us. Thank you so much for sharing, being vulnerable, telling your story, being an advocate and breaking down that stigma. Pastors, if you are interested in learning more, I encourage you to connect in with Greg, go on his blog, seek out resources. Like he said, look around, open your eyes to find someone around you so that you can hear their story as well. And thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of the summit.